Okay, welcome along everyone, lads and lassies, how you doing? Today we're focusing on paper 2, which is the non-fiction paper, as before. So you get a fiction paper, which is paper 1, you get a non-fiction paper, which is paper 2. And this week, week 5, we are focusing on bicycles and cycling, all things to do with bicycles and cycling. There'll always be what they call a thematic link between the two sources. So extract or source A and extract or source B, there's a link, and the link this week is to do with bikes and cycling. So it's all about attitudes. The paper is called Writers' Attitudes and Viewpoints, or Viewpoints and Perspectives. Sorry, I got it in the wrong order, doesn't matter. The main thing that you need to know is that it's all about their attitudes. The best way to describe this, I think, is how the writers feel. So how do the writers feel about cycling, essentially, is what we're dealing with, alright? Try and bring you through as quickly as we possibly can. You've been telling me that you're finding this useful, so I'll continue to post them up. They take quite a long time to do. Please go back and look at the questions one by one to help yourselves out before you push on into the next question. All right, make sure you feel comfortable before you move on. So language paper 2, which is non-fiction. The extracts this time are about bicycles. We've got essentially a 19th century article, which is all about a woman going on a bike for the first time through the busy streets of London. And then we've got a 21st century article, which is all about the dangers of bikes and cycling on busy, congested roads, particularly in London, it talks about as well. So the dangers of modern cycling, usually the modern paper comes first, the modern source, usually. So the modern cyclist and the dangers they face, that's the modern one, which is the 21st century. And then we've got one about the experience of cycling for the first time. So it's all about the experience of cycling for the first time. So this is the old one. We've got an old one, we've got a new one. They're both non-fiction. We've got to compare how the writer from this article, source B, feels about cycling compared to the cyclist, the article writer in article number 1, which is source A. Right, you know you've got your cheat sheet. Refer to this as much as you possibly can. You've also got your PDF version of the paper. This is exactly what you would get on the day in the exam, alright? It looks exactly like this, exactly the same. So it'll give you a little bit of information. It'll say this one was written in 2016, this one was written in 1896, this one is called this. It's from the 19th century, this one's from the 21st century. You don't need to worry about any of that. All you need to know is you get an old one, you get a new one. They will both be non-fiction. And your job is to talk about the feelings or attitudes of the old person, the old writer, versus the new person, the new writer, okay? And there should be maybe some similarities between them. They're both like this. Or maybe there are going to be some differences. Only one has got this. Those are the things we're going to talk about. So use this reference, this bad boy here. You should have that one available to you at all times. When you're doing question 1, you make sure you follow these instructions. When you're doing 2, you follow these instructions. When you're doing 3, and so on and so forth, till the end of time, over and over and over again, okay? We've got the choose question, simple, easy, AO1. Don't need to worry about it. Barely need to teach you it. Waste of time to teach you. We've got the summarize question, which was very similar, some of you think, to the compare question. This one is all AO1. A little bit of AO2 because you have to infer in it. This is all AO2 and this is AO3. Alright, so it gets more and more difficult as the paper goes on. In this summarized question, I've got to say the difference between the old and the new. Then the language question, that's going to be only usually on source B. By the time I get to the compare question, I can use the similarities and differences between the two texts, but instead of just talking about how the texts are different, I am talking about the attitude of the writers. So, who wrote this article? Who wrote this article? How do they feel about cyclists and cycling? That's the thematic link. Right, bicycles. It's week 5. It's all there for you. Go through this presentation, watch this video. Let me help you out a little bit. Make sure you read the instructions when you go back over it, okay? Take your time, do all of the tasks. Then you've got questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 to complete. This paper in the exam, you get 1 hour to complete, and you are being given 1 week. Right, so to read this and then read this and then do question 1, that should take you less than 15 minutes really. Then to go on and do question 2, that's going to take you 8 minutes to write it, but take 8 minutes to prepare as well. So there's 15 minutes on day 2, day 3, and so on and so forth. Do it a little bit at a time. But in the exam, just to remind you, you got to do this all in an hour. So if you're thinking, wow, there's so much to do here, you've got 1 hour to do this in the exam. Obviously, you wouldn't plan. That's not the point. Right. So you get 5 minutes for the first question, 10 minutes for the second, 15, and then 20. So this is a 4 marker. This is an 8 marker. This one's going to get you 16 marks. This one's going to get you 20 marks. All right? Exactly the same as we've done in previous weeks. This week, it's the 2018 paper, and it's the one from November. So they did this paper in November 2018, and it's all about cycling, and it is to do with modern and traditional cycling. Look, I forgot to get rid of the earthquakes. Don't worry about him. Right, question 1 then. I'll rattle through it as quick as I possibly can. You've got source A, which is called All Cyclists Fear Bad Drivers, and it's from the Guardian newspaper, which is a broadsheet, and it's from 2016, so it should feel okay to you. It should feel fairly modern. It's not going to be too intimidating. This one, source B, this one is from 1896, so this is a long time ago. We're talking about the 19th century, turn of the century here, just before the 20th century in fact. 4 years before the turn of the 20th century. So old, very old. This one is going to be difficult for us because of the style it is written in. So this one we're going to find easy because it's new. This one we're going to find difficult because it's old. It's just the way it works usually. For example, a new sport has lately been devised by the drivers of hansom cabs, and immediately you're thinking, well, I don't know what a hansom cab is. That's okay, because this one, because it's the old one, will always have a glossary for anything that you don't understand. So if you're not too sure of a word, you go back and you look at the glossary. For example, in this paper, it's got 2 words that are in the glossary: hansom cab, and I think omnibus is in there as well. Okay, right. First thing we do, we've got to read source A. We don't even bother reading source B yet. We read source A straight away. It's a modern one. It's from 2006. It's all about bikes versus cars. Okay, go away. Take 10 minutes. Read this bad boy here. You'll love it. I've also put a video up for you online that you can look. You can also read it in its original context on the Guardian website if you like, and that will give you the video alongside it. Alright, there's a link there sent out to you. That's on Firefly. Spend 10 minutes, watch that, read that, and then come back to me and we move on from there. Okay, question 1. Choose. You know what you've got to do. You've got to pick 4 of these that you think, yeah, definitely those 4 are true. You don't want to make a mistake in this question because it's 4 free marks. What you want to make sure that you do, fighting with me. What you want to make sure that you do in this question is that you are definitely sure when you make your choices. Now, if you make a mistake, look, it says shade the circles of the boxes that ones that you think are true. We're going to write them down because we're not doing the example. So in the exam, I would go like this. I'd shade that one in if I thought it was true. But then if I decided, oh no, what have I done? You can change your mind because you can cross that out. and then you draw a circle around a different one. So if I change my mind, I said, I think that one was true, and I shaded it in, I just cross it out, and then I pick this one instead. Alright, that's what you do in the exam. For the purposes of us right now, you can just write down A, C, E, H, whatever you like. Right, here's the statements. Most people in Britain ride a bike regularly. Most UK cyclists are pleased about the number of dangerous incidents on the road. The writer has never had a dangerous incident whilst cycling. The writer lives in South East London. As the car passed, the writer did not swerve. The writer soon caught up with the driver. The writer thought the driver's actions had been pointless. It is rare to meet dangerous drivers while cycling. We have to read lines 1 to 10. That's what it tells us, read lines 1 to 10. And we've got to decide which one of these is true. There are 4 of them that are true. We are only going to pick the ones that are true. We are only going to pick the ones that we can make sure are true by checking the source. Everything that we need is on the left-hand side. Let's have a little read. Ask most people who ride a bike regularly in the UK and they'll happily recount a list of terrifying or alarming incidents caused by the deliberate actions of another road user, usually someone in a motor vehicle. My last incident happened just under a week ago, when a driver decided to overtake my bike very closely and at speed on a narrow residential street near my home in South East London. I was unharmed, but the driver was gambling on the assumption that I would not, for example, hit a sudden pothole and swerve or wobble. Inevitably, the congested traffic meant I caught up with the driver at the very next junction. His relatively minor, but nonetheless very real, roll of the dice with my chances of making it home safely that evening had all been for nothing. That's appallingly common. Right. I've got 8 statements. 4 of them are going to be true. I've got to decide which ones are true, and I've got to shade in the ones that I think are true. So take your time, write the 4 statements out that you think are true, and then I'm going to turn over the slide and I'm going to reveal the ones that are true. I'll do one example here because I don't think this question is too challenging for you. So I'm going to look at statement A, and I'm only going to highlight that, shade that box in, write it down if I can prove it to be true. It says most people in Britain ride a bike regularly. It says ask most people who ride a bike regularly in the UK and they'll be happily recount a list of terrifying or alarming incidents caused by the deliberate actions of another road user. Right, hold on a second. This source is saying, or this question, this statement says most people in Britain ride a bike regularly. Now, I know that the word regularly, the word bike appears here. But is that what they're saying? Are they saying the exact same thing? Most people ride a bike regularly. Ask most people who ride a bike regularly in the UK and they'll happily recount. Hang on. The writer is not saying most people ride a bike regularly. They're saying ask most people. That's what they're saying. Ask most people in Britain who ride a bike regularly. That's not quite the same thing, is it? So I'm thinking no, that one is not true. They don't suggest in this article that everybody in the UK or lots of people in the UK are riding bikes regularly. In fact, later on in the article, the writer makes a point that it's not that many. Okay, let's go through the answers then. 8 statements, 4 of them you should have chosen by now. If you've got them wrong, it's okay. You can go back and check. But I'm going to show you how we can prove that these statements are true. Now, here are the 4 that are correct. There could be any order. In this particular paper, it's unusual because they've picked 4 in a row. You can see there, D, E, F, and G are all the true statements, whereas A, B, C, and H, all incorrect. Okay, all false. So let's make sure. Let's go back and see. The writer lives in South East London. How do we figure that out? On a narrow residential street near my home in South East London. I can verify it in the source. I must be able to, there's a good word for you, verify. It just means find or check. It's a funny end, isn't it? So I've got to find or check it in the source. Right, I know that one's true. As the car passed, the driver did not swerve. Right, let me see. My last incident last week, just under a week ago, when a driver decided to overtake my bike very closely and at speed on a narrow residential street, I was unharmed, but the driver was gambling on the assumption that I would not, for example, hit a pothole and swerve or wobble. Inevitably, the congested traffic meant I caught up with the driver at the next junction. His relatively minor, but nonetheless very real roll of the dice with my chances of making it home safely had all been for nothing. Right, I can't really find anywhere where it says that the car didn't swerve or that the writer didn't swerve. But there's this little bit here. It says he made the assumption that I would not, and then we've got a parenthetic clause, for example, hit a pothole, swerve, or wobble. So he made the assumption that I would not swerve. Now, to me, does that sound like he did swerve? So he made the assumption, the driver made the assumption that the writer would not swerve. So we know that the writer did not swerve. And we only know that because he was fine. He was unharmed, he says. Okay, so I can check that one off. Got that one. The writer soon caught up with the driver. I caught up with him at the driver at the next junction. Simple enough, that one. I can find it there. I can verify it in the source very easily. Finally, the writer thought the driver's actions had been pointless. This one's a little bit more difficult. He says, his real roll of the dice had all been for nothing. That's appallingly common. So, all been for nothing is the way that we can prove that this one is true. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 are true. I'll show you how we can make sure if we're unsure about one of the other ones. Alright, let's take H here. Let's say that, I wasn't sure. It is rare to meet dangerous drivers while cycling. Now, usually they'll put something in here that means you can figure out that that's definitely not true. We know it's not true. We've seen the answers. But here, look at this line. It's appallingly common, he says, which is the opposite of rare. So when something's common, that's the opposite of rare. And he says at the start, people who ride a bike will write a list of terrifying, alarming incidents. So if you've got a list, that means it's not something that's happened once, is it? It might have happened twice or 3 times or 4 times, whatever it is. And if there's a list, it's not rare either. So we know, no way, that one's not true. He's saying it's rare, that's not rare. It's common. Okay? Right, moving on. Q1 done. Q2, here we go. I've got to read source A, I've got to read source B as well. I've got to do both. Here is the question. You need to refer to source A and source B, because I'm going to summarise. Both sources describe the similar ways in which drivers behave. And this is what I need to do. I need to highlight in the question what I am summarising. So I'm writing a summary of the driver's behaviour. I'm writing a summary of how the drivers behave in these 2 articles. In this article and in this article. I've got to think about how the writers behave. Here it is. Go back and make sure you read both sources. Think about the key phrase, driver's behaviour. And you're going to write for 8 minutes, which is about 4 minutes per article. And I want to make sure I do that because I've got to treat them evenly. That's what the mark scheme will say, even treatment. So if I don't quote both sources, I'm in trouble. And this is what I've got to do. I'm going to say, well, in source A, the writer shows that the back drivers behave like, whereas, similarly, in a different way, although, whilst, in contrast, the drivers behave in this way in source B. Okay? Right, let's have a go. Two sources, source A, source B. I'm talking about the driver's behaviour. Sometimes it's necessary to rephrase the question a little bit. Both the sources describe similarities between the driver's behaviour. Okay, so similar. It's telling me, it's giving me a little clue that they behave in the same way. I've got to go through this one and through this one and think about the driver's conduct, their behaviour, their actions, their inactions, how they treat the cyclists. Alright, here we go. I've got an example here. So I've taken. Why is it fighting with me? Okay. Source A. Source A goes on this side. Source B goes on this side. I've got the modern, which is source A, versus the 19th century, which is source B. I'm talking about the driver's behaviour. How do the drivers behave in the sources? And I'm going to just do it very, very simple. You can copy it if you like. You should make your own. Go through both. Simple bullet point list of the way the drivers behave. Then I've got to put it into this form. Here we go. In source A, the drivers are inconsiderate of cyclists. For example, there's a quote there. They decided to overtake my bike very closely and at speed. Whereas in source B, the taxi drivers target the cyclists. She says that she has been the prey of the handsome cabman. That's a taxi. Okay? I'm going to write some simple ideas. So in the modern extract, this one, source A, it seems to me that the people who are in the cars are presented as the enemy. How they behave is not only inconsiderate, but they behave dangerously. They could kill the cyclists. How else do they behave? They're always in a rush. He talks about the congestion and getting to the junction at the same time. So we know that they're trying to race between these traffic lights, but it seems pointless to him. He's annoyed. He's thinking, why are they bothering to race to the next set of lights? I'm going to catch up to them. Let's think about another way they behave. They don't seem to behave, let's say, carefully. He describes them as being in metal cars, doesn't he? Really heavy metal cars. And they don't really behave as if they don't want to cause damage to the cyclists. He wants them to be more careful. He wants them to behave in a way that is considerate or careful, or at the very least aware of the cyclists, so that these cyclists don't get hurt. Now it's very obvious that if they were going to get hurt, if there was going to be a collision between a car and a cyclist, there's only one person who's going to get hurt there, isn't there? What about source B? How do the drivers in source B behave? Well, she describes getting bullied and harassed by the cabs. Now these are horse-drawn. Okay. How else has she been treated? They chase her. They shout at her. And it seems, particularly in source B, that there's a little bit of misogyny, I think. So there's a little bit of misogyny. They are anti-women. these cab drivers, they shout at her while she's cycling down these streets trying to make her way through. They bully her. They're quite, I think, oppressive in their behaviour. So we've got to compare these two things. Now, I just got to summarise. Those are the main points. It would be enough to pick one of these two things and compare them, but it'd have to be the main one. You'll see that in the example here. So we take the list. I've got this list and this list. I've got to take those and I've got to use my structure to put them into a paragraph. I'm going to say, here's my quotation, here's what the writer says, this suggests, and this is similar or different in source B. So the writer says that the drivers in source A are dangerous. This is clear in the line, or this is apparent here. Here's my quotation. This suggests, I've got to infer. Then I've got to compare. Whereas in source B, the writer conveys that the drivers are similarly dangerous, also as dangerous, equally inconsiderate. This is apparent in the line, and then I'm going to try and infer a little bit. Here's an example. This is going to get between 5 and 6 marks. It does a couple of things really well. It mentions both sources, so it says something like whereas. It quotes from both. You can see how important both sources are. And it infers. So you've got your 3-step process. Quote, infer, compare. Quote, infer, compare. Alright? There's a reason now that we use this system. This one's going to get 5 or 6 marks. It's going to get a good mark in its GCSE. It's not perfect, but it's good. One driver in source A decided to overtake my bike very closely. I've got my quotation. Now I've got a quote. At speed, which shows he behaved in a reckless way. That's my inference. I've now inferred. Now I've got to compare. Whereas in source B, the drivers behave in a similar way. That's compare. So you can see that this person is just following that 1, 2, 3 approach there. Quoting, inferring, comparing. The drivers behave in a similar and inconsiderate way towards the cyclist because they love to share your handlebars and pass so close, showing they are not behaving very respectfully. That's my inference. By driving so close to the cyclist. Both drivers behave in inconsiderate ways. As in source A, the driver's dangerous behaviour is to make sure they get ahead of the cyclist in congested traffic. I'll quote it again and infer it again. Whereas the drivers in source B are taking pleasure in chasing the lady on purpose. It's a very good response. Here's another example, and I want you to go away then and write your own 8-mark response. I'm going to do it in less than 8 minutes. This one's going to get full marks. Full marks, something like this could get. The driver in source A who decided to overtake shows behaviour which is irresponsible, but rational. The only difference between the 5 to 6 marks and the 7 to 8 marks is the depth of inference. So here, they've recognised that they're irresponsible, that's one inference, but they've also recognised that they're rational. They're not meaning to kill the person, they're just in a rush. So it's a rational decision that they've made. Okay, so a detailed inference is where you're going to get into level 4. And that is always going to be the difference. We talked about this last week. He makes an assessment of the risk in passing very closely in at speed and does not intend any harm, although he knows the odds are stacked in his favour because he's cocooned, quoting, in his car where he'll not get hurt. On the other hand, the drivers in source B are intentionally targeting cyclists. So here's the difference that's been recognised. In contrast, in source B, they're intentionally targeting cyclists by passing so close, which suggests they are equally irresponsible, but their behaviour is irrational and immoral too because it's planned. So, a clear distinction, a difference. In source A, they're doing it because they're trying to get there in a rush, but they're not trying to bully the cyclists. And in source B, they're bullying the cyclists because they seem to enjoy it. Here's your job, 8 minutes, behaviour of the drivers, off you go. If you need a further little bit of help, don't pause the video yet. I'll go on to the next slide and I'll do a very, very quick example. Here's the 5 to 6 marker. I'm going to do an answer here that will get you about 5 or 6 marks definitely, maybe slightly more. And I'm going to rumble it out very, very quickly. Alright, let me see. So, in source A, the drivers is described as careless and inconsiderate. As the driver passes closely and at speed. Unconcerned. As they rush to avoid or escape congestion. So, in source A, the driver's behaviour is described as careless and inconsiderate as the driver passes closely and at speed, unconcerned about the dangers as they rush to avoid or escape congested traffic. Okay? And I'm going to say, whereas, there's my comparison. So I have quoted, there's my quotes, speed, congested traffic. I have inferred. They're inconsiderate, they're unconcerned, they're avoiding traffic. Now I've got to compare. So, my comparison. They're unconcerned about the dangers as they rush to avoid or escape congested traffic. Whereas the drivers in source B are portrayed as bullies, intent on harassing our narrator. There's a little quote I can embed, for example. I've put it in brackets because it doesn't quite fit in the sentence. Whereas the writers in source B, the drivers in source B, are portrayed as bullies intent on harassing our narrator as she navigates the streets for the first time. So perhaps, let's say, unused to cyclists, they, I'm going to say bully again, try to intimidate her by, let's say, sharing her handlebars. Okay. I've quoted, I've inferred, and I've compared. I don't know how long that took. A lot less than 8 minutes. You get 8 minutes. Here's some of the things that you can talk about. Right, have a go. Oh, I forgot that I'd written more already. You've got that on the slide anyway. I've written it on the wrong slide. This is where I should have written my example. My example should go there. I forgot that I'd written you this one as well. Giving you so many examples. That's like 4 examples you've got now. Alright? You've got 2 from AQA, 1 from me here, and then another one which I've written on the previous slide, which is there. Okay? save this and put it on there. Right, question 3. I'll adapt it before I put it on so you can read that nice and easily. Now you need to refer to only to source B. Source B, and we're in the language question. We know that this is 12 marks, okay? Plus your 8, plus your 4, plus your 20, that brings you up to a total of 40, so you're getting 40 marks for the paper in total. You did this question in paper 1 where it was worth 8 marks, it's now worth 12 marks. So there's more of a value in the questions as they go. So it's 1, then more marks for 2, more marks for 3. This is question 2 in the language paper 1. It's question 3 this time, so it's worth even more. I'm going to read between 8 and 18. So you want to go to the section in source B, which begins riding on a track, began to bore me, right up until nervousness. Now I've copied that out for you so you can see it in just a minute. But I'm only doing source B, and I'm describing the first experience of cycling. This is her first experience of cycling. So what language techniques, what methods does she use to convey her first experience of cycling? Now I can say anything about her experience. I could say how in danger she feels. I could talk about the excitement she feels. I could talk about how keen she was. Any of those things. But I'm going to talk about how those methods she uses convey those feelings. Okay? So how does the writer use language? What methods does she use to show how she feels about cycling? Now, at this time, it's 1896, there were not too many cyclists on the road, mainly omnibuses and hansom cabs there that it mentions. She's in the minority. She's hugely in the minority. And then she's in the minority again because if there were bikes on the road, they would be driven by men, right? Predominantly men. So I suppose that accounts for a lot of the bullying that she experiences. Remember, it's 1896. We're talking about endemic misogyny and gender inequality at the time. So this is also, if we talk in terms of class, the writer of this article is the Countess of Malmesbury. Okay, so she would be an upper class lady. It would not be accessible for the working class at this time to be able to afford a bike. That would come later. Right, here's the extract. There she is, looking very dapper there on her bike. Doesn't look that old, that bike, does it? Source B, the experience of cycling. Right, I've got to pick 3 quotes. I'm just going to go through and I'll talk about some of the quotations that are not on the next slide, okay? I've picked these 3. So I'm going to talk about instead, in this extract, some of the things that you could say that I do not in my answer. Right, riding on a track began to bore me as soon as I had learned to balance. So, to me, when she's talking about being on a track there is, like a railway track. So she wants to move away from the railway track. So she feels bored of being stuck on the railway track. So instead she wants the freedom. So to me, that tells us that she is a little bit adventurous. I can infer that she's adventurous. She was bored of cycling the same track over and over. She learned to balance, but she remained steadily practicing until I could turn easily, cut figures of 8, get on and off quickly, and stop without charging into unwelcome obstacles. I'll deal with that one in a moment. This done, burning to try my fate in traffic. Isn't this an unusual word to use? So burning is when you get hot. To me, this has got connotations of desire. She cannot wait to get going out in traffic. So burning to try my fate. Fate here has got connotations of gambling as well, doesn't it? So she wants to see how she's going to get on. I'll come to the simile, we'll talk about that in a second. So she launches her little bicycle early one Sunday morning into a stormy ocean of Sloane Street. Well, we know that that's a metaphor. It's not literally a stormy ocean. The stormy ocean might convey, for example, that it is, oh my god, that's really annoying, how busy it is, or maybe how chaotic. how difficult it is to navigate. All of those things would be brilliant to talk about. She's going to see her friend who lives 4 miles away. The streets were really very clear, but I shall never forget my terror. So they were quite clear, but she feels terrified. So there's a bit of a contrast here. She should be quite safe, but she feels terror. Why is that? Talk about that if I like. I arrived in about 2 hours, streaming and exhausted. Much more in need of an assistance than the invalid I went to visit. The invalid is the sick person. More, you got your comparative adjective there. It could also be hyperbole. Try to use that one if you like. So she's more sick than the person she was going to visit by the time she gets there. So stressful was this encounter. Right. I'll quickly go through this as an example. I've done some now. She's bordering on collapse. She wants to conquer her nervousness. All of these you can talk about. I'm going to give you my 3 examples. I've staggered it. So this one is done for you essentially. This one is nearly done. It's kind of done. And this one is not done at all for you. Alright? So it's for you to have a go. First example. So here's my quotation. I was steadily practicing. I was cutting figures of 8. I was going off and on quickly. I'm going to identify the adverbs. I can also see the verbs there. Practicing, which is a present tense verb. And I can also recognize the cut to cut. So the idea of, I don't know, a pair of scissors there. The idea that she is going in a figure of 8. Did I forget how to draw an 8 there? How bad was that? So she's going like this. Round and round and round again on the bike. Okay? So she's cutting figures of 8, which means she would have to, I don't know, this is the handlebars of the bike. She's having to turn, isn't she? This is going to have to go like this. And if you've been on a bike and you know that if you do that too quickly, too violently, you could come off very, very quickly. So to me, the idea of cutting figures of 8 and steadily practicing, that tells me about her that she doesn't want to go out onto the road until she's ready. What does that tell me about her experience? She prepares herself. So this suggests the writer was nervous to venture out in the streets, wants to make sure she's good at it first, and she was trying to prepare herself properly, making sure she was agile by cutting figures of 8. You're going to make sure that you can navigate nice and quickly. And adept. The adverbs easily and quickly, steadily, quick, that she's growing in confidence. And the verb cut figures of 8, here also implies the nimbleness the writer has achieved. So I don't know, she's cycling along. And she comes to an obstacle. She's cycling, and she's able to go around it nice and quickly because she can cut figures of 8, so she's able to navigate nice and quickly. She is going to be brilliant on the roads if somebody steps out in front of her. Okay, next one I think is quite simple, so I've done a little bit on it for you, not much. She says she was as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. Now, I'll put too fine a point of it on this one, but you've got your rabbit. Okay, you got your rabbit. You've got your little doggy. And that's chasing this rabbit. So we've got the hunter and we've got the hunted. So she's saying, I'm like a hare. Who does that make the dogs that are chasing her? That could be potentially the drivers that are out on the road. So she was as nervous as a hare, the rabbit, that's feeling the greyhound's breath. So this greyhound, this dog, is so close to chasing and catching this rabbit that it's about to kill it. So I'm not going to finish this off here. The simile, as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath, implies that the writer was the prey, going out into the streets that were full of who is the hunter, who is the killer, who is the apex predator in this particular example. Okay, for you to figure out. Right, last one. The streets were really very clear, but I shall never forget my terror. You could just zoom in on terror. That's nice and easy. Abstract noun. Difficult to define what terror is, but it's got lots of connotations, doesn't it? So, frightened, shaking, worried, anxiety, etc. So the writer suggests that she felt very frightened, was nervous, was shaking, was anxious about going out onto the streets, even though they were very, intensifier, clear. Really very clear. The clearness of the streets contrasted, that's what I'd like you to talk about here, contrasted with the terror that she feels, suggests that she is particularly, and then you can talk about how you think she feels. Alright? So terror is what you focus on there. You've got the intensifier, really very, very is the intensifier there. Very clear. Clear is the adjective. You can see that very is not actually there, so make sure you know that very is the intensifier. Very clear, clear is the adjective. Right, moving on. Here's an example. The writer describes himself as nervous as a hare that feels a greyhound's breath. The simile suggests she's very anxious about cycling in traffic. In racing, the hare is chased by the greyhound, and this simile creates an image of herself as a small, vulnerable creature on her bike, with the other vehicles in the road racing behind her, like greyhounds, showing how frightened she is of them. This has got a detailed inference, which is brilliant. If you did this about 3 times, you could probably move up into level 4 there, I'd say. Here's an example of a level 4 response that's going to get between 10 and 12 marks. Now this is very detailed, so level 4 is always about detailed inference. So don't worry if you're not up here. If you're saying something sensible down here for the time being, that's absolutely fine. I'll be very happy with that. Here's a good example though. The writer establishes a series of hunting images. Okay, so this person identifies that there's a pattern, which is very high level, to reflect their sense of being a victim on the roads, and uses the simile as nervous as a hare that feels a greyhound's breath to describe their fear of being hounded. The image is a reference to greyhound racing where delicate hares, detailed, delicate hares, race for its life ahead of a much larger, faster, more aggressive dog. Can you see the detail here? And more aggressive dog, emphasising how intimidated and vulnerable the writer feels as she sets off unprotected on her fragile bicycle. She's not even wearing a helmet, is she? Look at her. You can see her there. With much bigger and potentially life-threatening vehicles breathing down her neck. Right, you get the example. Get the idea. I'm going to do an example. Use this. Here is a difficult one, or here's an easy one, sorry. I'm going to do the difficult one, which is this. I'm going to do it in this slide. Here we go. How does a writer use language to describe her first experiences of cycling? Firstly, the writer presents the streets as a lawless gauntlet. Right, I'm going to do some bad art now. A gauntlet would be, it's like a pathway that a soldier would have to go down, and then on either side there would be all of these other soldiers. Now these other soldiers have all got in their hands weapons. And this soldier who's going to come walking down here, they're going to have to run this gauntlet, and every time they pass one of these soldiers, they're going to smash them with their sword. So they're going to try and get through here without getting hit. What am I talking about? Without getting hit, or without getting killed, without getting too badly damaged. So imagine yourself working yourself down a really busy corridor, and you're getting bumped and scraped and scratched, and all sorts of injuries are occurring. So that's what a gauntlet is. Type it into Google there, or type it into YouTube, running the gauntlet. So she's going into a dangerous area. The writer presents the streets as a lawless gauntlet filled with taxis and buses who attack our narrator. Now I'm going to use this same simile she uses, which is as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. So I'm going to say, I could use this line. We can see this in the choice of the simile. So the writer presents the streets as a lawless gauntlet filled with taxis and buses who attack our narrator. And she is shown to be vulnerable. So she's very vulnerable. We see this in the choice of the simile. Hare, greyhound, breath. That's the quotation. As nervous as the hare that feels the greyhound's breath. Which conveys her position as prey in the analogy. The writer is trying to assure the audience feels sympathetic towards our writer as she attacked and chased by the villainous dog-like. Can't spell dog, look at that. Okay. The writer presents the streets as a lawless gauntlet filled with taxis and buses who attack our narrator, and she is shown to be vulnerable, weak, easy to attack. This is apparent. We see this in the choice of the simile, the hare with the greyhound breathing down its neck, which conveys her position as the prey in the analogy. She is the prey, they are the hunter. The writer is trying to ensure that the audience feels sympathy towards our writer as she is attacked and chased by these villainous dog-like drivers on the streets of London. Right, quick example. Right, take a break there. Write your question 3, 12 marks. Follow the steps one by one. You can't mess it up. Use these phrases to help you out. Then last one, question 4. Spend 10 minutes on this one and then we're done. Question 4 is, compare how the writers convey their similar perspectives on cycling in the city. So it's cycling in the city. It's perspectives. We know that perspectives are points of views. They are viewpoints. We are going to talk about feelings. So what are the feelings of the writers on cycling in the city? There's 3 things I've got to do. I've got to talk about their views. That's bullet point number 1. I also have to compare. So I have to make some sort of comparison between the viewpoints of the 2 writers. Then number 3, I'm going to have to make sure that I support. So I'm going to quote. But look at this. I've got to talk about the methods as well. So muddled up between compare and quote here. I am going to have to do some sort of AO2. Remember that there's AO2 in here as well. There is AO3. It's an AO3 question. But you have to talk about methods. If you don't talk about the methods that the writer uses, you're not getting the marks, alright? Similar to evaluation. Question 4 in paper 1, when you evaluate, you're talking about the validity of the method, the validity of the choices. You're still having to talk about AO2. Okay, quick map. Here's a comparison. In source A, the writer feels, has the perspective towards cycling, has the perspective, has the attitude towards cycling. So you're going to take 5 minutes. Go and fill in these two maps. Two little bullet point maps. Source A, the writer feels this way, has this attitude to cycling. Source B, the writer has this attitude, this perspective to cycling. Alright? Pause this and then come back to it when you're done in 5 minutes. Right. Our example then. We are talking about cycling, and we want to talk about how they feel about cycling. Okay? Their attitudes to cycling. Source A, here's how Source A feels. Source A feels that the drivers are dangerous and inconsiderate towards cyclists. He feels that cyclists are put off the roads by bad drivers and feels worried about the potential impacts of collisions, accidents and carelessness. Source A is a little bit more relaxed. So let's talk about the tone here. A little bit panicked, a little bit angry, a little bit fed up. Tired maybe. The tone here, a little bit more humorous. Definitely a little bit more self-deprecating. So she's putting herself down a little bit for comic effect. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, I would say. And she says she's excited about the cycling and the independence it provides her. She's really scared of the congestion on the roads. And she talks about how they could kill her at any moment, but she doesn't do it in a kind of a panicked, angry way. She does it in a kind of a, let's have a joke about it, to make a serious point. But she's determined to succeed, despite how difficult and dangerous she thinks cycling is. Right, I'm going to have a go. I have to address the bullets. So I've got to talk about attitude. I'm going to have to quote both sources, so I'm going to have to think about an attitude from both sources. I've got to talk about the methods used in both sources. And I've got to talk about the attitudes or perspectives. Alright, so I'll make that really clear. Number one, perspectives or attitudes. I'm going to have to talk about methodology. And then I've got to quote both texts. Alright. I don't have to do it in those orders. This is the order I use here. This is my bad boy. I keep coming back to this all the time. There's my steps. I'm going to think about something to compare. Right, so how do they both feel about cycling? They both like cycling, but they recognise that it's dangerous. So they both think that cycling is dangerous, for example. I'm going to use a quote. In source A, I know that it's dangerous because here is the method that the writer uses to convey that it's dangerous. It's similar to text B, where it's shown to be dangerous with this method. Right, one example for you. In source A, the writer's attitude, source A I'm doing first, is one of anger and frustration due to the carelessness he perceives that drivers have on the roads. He says, systems should be revamped to place far more stress on drivers' vast overriding responsibility to look out for and protect vulnerable road users, he says, those not cocooned within a ton of metal. Now, a ton of metal is a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it? So that's hyperbole. The drivers are not literally in a ton of metal. Or actually, are they? Think about it. How heavy is a car? And if you really consider it, how dangerous is a car as a consequence? He also uses this modal verb. He says, systems should be revamped. Should. So he wants you to change. Here's my inference. So I'm going to say, this is the writer's attitude. This is the method they use. Here's what I can infer. And then I need to make my comparison. So I'm going to follow this approach. I'm going to do 1, attitude. 2, what method have they used? I've got a quote there at that point. 3, I'm going to try and infer. 4, I'm going to try and compare. So if I go back, you can see. Compare, quote, infer, and let's just compare. here's the difference, or one difference anyway, between source A and source B. In source A, the writer's attitude is angry and frustrated, whereas in source B, the attitude is similarly concerned with the safety of cyclists and angered by the behaviour of the drivers. So both sources are angry at the drivers and concerned about the safety of cyclists. She says drivers of hansoms have various ways of inflicting torture on a fellow creature. So she also uses hyperbole, torture. It's not really torture. Inflicting torture sounds like she's being pinned down and horrible things being done to her by these taxi drivers. Hot coals and all the rest. The collective plural, various ways. They have various ways of inflicting torture. It makes it sound there's lots of things that they can do. So here's the inference here. Let's go through the comparison of both. I think I've missed this one ever so slightly. So in source A, the writer's attitude is angry. He suggests that there's not enough protection in place for cyclists. He says he wants new rules to make sure the drivers are more careful. He says that the drivers have overriding responsibility, which suggests the use of overriding responsibility. He feels the motorist should be the one to assume accountability. The motorist should be the one that looks after the trouble, given they are protected by a ton of metal, which is hyperbole. Whereas in source B, they are equally concerned with the safety of the cyclists, particularly with regard to the drivers of hansom cabs. The collective plural various ways and the metaphor of inflicting torture suggests that the writer is frustrated by the behaviour of the road users and feels under pressure, anxious, or a victim of torture. She feels that the taxis particularly act like bullies and have ways or lots of simple tricks they can use to intimidate her, which may force her literally off the road. Okay, there's your big example. Now you need to make a table like this. So you're going to say source A. I'm going to quote. I'm going to think about the attitude of the writer. Quote, attitude. I'm going to make sure I infer or talk about method. And then I'm going to compare. So there's 4 things to do. That is all anyway in your sheet here. So I'm going to find a comparison. I'm going to quote and think about my inference, think about my method that I could examine. I'm going to then examine that method with my inference, and then I am going to compare. Alright, simple as that. The writer of source A seems to fail, whereas the writer of source B, this seems is suggested by the use of the method, all of those things. Here's the steps that you must use. Got to quote, got to talk about methods, have to talk about attitudes. It's no accident that those 3 bullet points are there. Okay, those 3 bullet points are there to help you out. So attitudes is this one, methods is this one, and support is quote. Right, those are the 3 key words in those bullet points. Here's the example. I'll rattle through these nice and quickly. I know we're over an hour now, so I'll make sure it's done now within the next 5. In source A, Walker believes that car drivers make cycling more dangerous than it should be. I've highlighted the attitude in red for you. Then I've got my quotation, and then I've got my inference. He addresses the drivers directly. Remember that these are human beings and uses emotive words such as flesh is bone to persuade the readers to understand that cyclists are real people who can get hurt. Then there's the comparison. This is similar in source B, where the cyclist is prey to the Victorian cab drivers. But Walker uses a serious tone. The writer in source B uses a humorous tone. There's the comparison. Here is a hugely impressive response. I wouldn't expect you to be doing this well just yet. However, I've put it in anyway. This is the attitude which is highlighted in the red. And again, the attitude that's highlighted in the red. The underlying moral view of source A is that selfish drivers are guilty of creating danger, whereas Walker uses humour to emphasise her own vulnerability. So you can see the difference between the 2 texts. Right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to do a very, very quick example. First of all, I'm going to find a comparison. I'm going to say both texts are concerned about the safety of cyclists. 1. Done. I'm going to have to quote from both sources. Number 2. Source A. In source A, this is clear on the line. In source A suggests that drivers, if I come back here, let's see, if I come back to my example in source A, he describes vulnerable road users and drivers within a ton of metal. So that's what I'm going to use. Source suggests that drivers are safe in a ton of metal. Hyperbolically, emphasizing the danger they present. That's my method. So source A suggests that the drivers are safe in a ton of metal, using hyperbole to emphasize the danger they present to other road users who he describes as vulnerable, which I'm going to say itself connotes, that's my method again, what does vulnerability connote? Let's say weakness. So it connotes weakness and a need for protection. If something's vulnerable, we need to protect it. Now I'm going to do my comparison. So I've used my method, I've used my technique, I have inferred, but I now have to compare, and I haven't done source B yet. So I'm going on to 3 is in there already. Whereas in source B, the writer feels equally and in fact victimized by bullying drivers of the road. So, whereas in source B, the writer feels equally unsafe and vulnerable, and in fact feels victimized by the bullying drivers of the road, who she thinks hunt for sport. I could do the hair quote there, and I think it's greyhound, isn't it? I don't want to go back and get this sheet just because of time. So I could use my greyhound quote. I think they hunt for sport as they chase the lady. Let's just analyse a method quickly. The choice of chase here connotes harassment. So because she's used the word chase, it suggests that she's being harassed and that they are being criminal in some way. Alright? Simple example. Have a go. If you get stuck, rewind the video. use the tasks to help you out as much as you can. Remember just to follow this system here. If you stick to this, you can't really go wrong. Okay? Right, thanks for staying with me. See you next time.